Please be seated. Kanzi is pretty smart. Well, smart for a bonobo, anyway. When he was still just a baby, Kanzi accompanied his adoptive mother to her regular training sessions with primatologists at Georgia State University. And at these training sessions, Kanzi's mother, Matata, learned language using a keyboard of lexicograms. I put keyboard in air quotes there because it's not so much a keyboard like you might use on a computer as a mat that lays on the ground and is inscribed with symbols that apes learn to associate with specific words. Apes don't have the physical ability to communicate like humans can, but they can learn sign language and they can use symbols to communicate, such as pointing to the lexigram for water when they want to drink. Like most children, Kanzi didn't show much interest in the lessons that his mother was learning until one day he shocked primatologists at Georgia State by competently using the lexigram mat while his mother was away. Kanzi thus became the first ape to learn language naturalistically through absorbing it indirectly rather than through direct instruction. Not only that, Kanzi was a regular William Shakespeare of the bonobo world, as it turned out. While researchers had struggled to teach Matata 10 words, Kanzi quickly surpassed the bonobo matriarch, and as of recent years had learned some 350 lexigram symbols, which he can also combine into sentences, and he understands some 3,000 spoken English words. He can use his lexigram mat to combine subjects and verbs even, or multiple verbs to show future intent, such as things like I tickle or chase hide. Not only that, but Kanzi apparently learned quite a bit of American Sign Language, not because he was taught sign language, but because he watched videos of Coco the gorilla and learned from her. I swear I'm not making this up. Like I said, Kanzi is really smart. He can use tools. He has enormous linguistic abilities. He can form complex sentences, and he can even hear novel words and then discover their context, all of which sounds like he is a very, very smart ape indeed. But there's one thing missing. Not just in Kanzi, but in all apes trained to communicate with humans, which is that they don't seem to be able to ask questions. It's such an obvious and simple thing that it almost doesn't register at first, and on reflection starts to seem remarkably odd. Even when he knows how to ask questions, even when he knows how to answer questions, Kanzi doesn't actually do it himself. He seems to have no curiosity or interest about the world or his place in it. He doesn't seek to know more than what is right in front of him. Oddly enough, questions appear to be almost entirely a one-way street when it comes to apes. Humans ask them, and the apes respond. This is a curiosity that has perplexed primatologists for decades. As researchers Ann and David Premack wrote about another ape named Sarah, she did not herself ever ask any questions, unlike the child who asks interminable questions such as, what's that? Who's making noise? When daddy come home? Where puppy? Sarah the ape never delayed the departure of her trainer after her lessons by asking where their trainer was going or when she was returning or anything else. Likewise, when trainers leave, Kanzi doesn't seem the least bit interested in their personal lives or about the university that houses him or anything else outside of his immediate experience. He knows how to ask questions, but he never really does. The thought apparently has never occurred to him. Kanzi is very smart for a bonobo, but at the end of the day, he's a bonobo interested in bonobo things. Presumably, Kanzi doesn't lay asleep at night filled with anxiety about the state of the world or his place within it, his relationships or what other people think about him, his role in society, his work-life balance, whether he looks good in a new outfit, or anything else that humans seem to obsess over. In fact, this is a key difference that appears to be one of the things that separates humans from other primates, which is the ability to question in an abstract way, to ask ourselves those why questions that become the basis of philosophies and religions. Now, you're probably wondering what on earth any of this has to do with the readings today. Well, get used to it, folks, because when I preach, you're always going to learn something, and I love to connect threads of things that appear to be totally unrelated. But in this particular case, though, I think our friend Kanzi has everything to do with the gospel reading this morning, and I'm being serious. I'm sure you've heard the expression, you don't know what you don't know, right? Well, Kanzi has a great deal of things that he's ignorant of, and he has no interest in learning anymore. There are just things that his mind can't grasp and that he would never think to ask, like, where the researchers go when they leave the primate house. But human beings can and should ask those sorts of questions. We should be asking where people go. We should be asking the harder questions beyond our immediate experience. We are a heck of a lot smarter than apes, at least I hope so. You see, today's gospel reading is about blindness. But that's just the immediate and obvious subject matter, a man born blind whom Jesus heals. The much deeper issue in play here, the issue that the Apostle John really wants us to consider, is what blindness actually means, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, as a metaphor for our lives. Do we ever choose to be blind? As a matter of convenience, maybe, or a matter of privilege, a matter of prejudice? And here our Pharisees enter stage right. First, they accuse the healed man of being a liar, of course, and then they accuse him of being a sinner, and then they absolutely refuse to hear anything he has to say about the matter, and they run him out of Pharisee HQ. The icing on the cake is when the man returns to Jesus, acknowledges Jesus as the Messiah, and worships him, we get this final gut punch of a line. Jesus said, "I came into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." And some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we're not blind, are we?" And Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sinned, but now that you say, we see, your sin remains." I think it should be quite obvious at this point that we are not talking about real blindness here at all, but blindness as a metaphor. The blindness of the Pharisees is twofold in the story. First, they fail to see Jesus as the promised Messiah, and second, they fail to see the man's healing as the profoundly good thing that it was, and they instead obsess over whether Jesus had worked on the Sabbath or whether the blind man had sinned. The real blind one was never the man without sight, but the Pharisees in their refusal to see the truth for what it was. Jesus points out to the Pharisees that they might score a 20/20 perfect vision on their driver's test at the DMV, but they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when it comes to spiritual matters. Blindness here is a metaphor for ignorance, for legalism, for prejudice, for privilege. The Pharisees are blind because they choose to be, presumably because it's a lot more comfortable that way. The point I'm driving at is to ask a question today: what are we blind to? There are so many things in this world that operate just below the level of our day-to-day experience and yet should be part of our awareness. There are so many things that are embedded in webs of injustice in our world, not of our making, but are also part of our daily lives. The shirt that I bought that was made at a sweatshop in Kuala Lumpur. The cheap electronic device that was made by slave labor in Shenzhen. The water that I drink that comes from a source that is depleting before our very eyes. The food that I eat, saran-wrapped and sanitized, made through the suffering and death of countless living things. The comfort and privilege I accept as my birthright that is also the product of generations before me who have stolen land and labor and hope. And yet most of the time, I'm quite like our bonobo friend. who never thinks to ask a question, who appears to be totally blind to the comfortable cage in which he lives. I do not expect an ape to care about justice or righteousness, but I should care. We should care. And the very fact that we frequently don't ask the questions that would shake the padded cells we live in is its own kind of wake-up call. Did you know, just one small example, that nearly 500 people pass through Casa Elitas Migrant Families Welcome Center on a typical day? Hundreds and hundreds of people every day, legal migrants, seeking opportunity, seeking scraps from the table that has made me fat. And I could easily live my entire life without asking a single question about it. Who are these people, these fellow children of God? Where do they come from? Where are they going? What do they need? How can I help? Am I blind? Are we blind to what happens in our own communities sometimes? Are we blind to the systems of power and persuasion that take from the poor in order to reward the rich? Are we blind to injustice which festers in the darkness of corruption that rings in the pockets of politicians and fills the tanks of private jets? Are we blind to those who come to a land of promise seeking the same opportunities that we have been given? I know I've been blind. I know I have. But I also know that Jesus says that the glory of God is revealed through healing, through life given in abundance. I feel the need to be more aware of the people around me, people who I may never interact with if I don't leave my comfort zone. I feel a need to serve others, and in so doing, to serve Christ as well. I feel a need to be healed, renewed, forgiven by a God who has a purpose for each of us in healing this hurting world. If only we had the eyes to see it. And in seeking the truth, to become part of God's plan for reconciliation, for renewal, and for rebirth. And so today my prayer can be, God of compassion, heal our blindness and self-interest, and give us hearts and hands to serve in your holy name. Amen.